If you haven't heard, PragerU is suing YouTube because, like many right-wing groups, they think that social media platforms have a bias against conservatives.
The most important lawsuit in America right now, and perhaps the free world, is Prager University versus YouTube. You might consider this a grandiose statement, especially since I'm the lead attorney for PragerU. I assure you, it's not. That's because this case is about the most fundamental freedom Americans have, freedom of speech, as enunciated in the First Amendment to the United States Constitution.
No, it isn't. It is arguably about freedom of speech, but not as it is enunciated in the Constitution. The Constitution says Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, and nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. This means that Congress can't abridge your freedom of speech, and the states can't abridge it. Nowhere does it say that YouTube can't censor you. It doesn't say that any private entity can't boot you from their platform if they want to. Maybe there are laws that say YouTube can't censor you, but those laws aren't a part of the Constitution. In fact, I know at least one Supreme Court justice who argued that such laws, like net neutrality, which prohibits ISPs from denying equal service on any basis, including political views, are a violation of those ISPs' First Amendment rights, because the rule impermissibly infringes on the internet service provider's editorial discretion. Any government intervention to keep online platforms such as YouTube from booting people on the basis of their political views would similarly infringe upon that platform's editorial discretion. Who was that Supreme Court justice? Brett Kavanaugh. So all the folks at PragerU who were cheering for Kavanaugh during his hearings are going to get a nasty surprise from their buddy Brett if their case ever goes to the Supreme Court. But maybe they'll luck out and Kavanaugh will share PragerU's double standard with respect to ISPs and social media websites. The guys at PragerU oppose rules that keep ISPs from doing exactly what they are trying to stop YouTube from doing. In their video on net neutrality, they said,
they argued that without regulations, a very small number of companies, the ISPs, would wield enormous censorship powers. Our free speech would be in jeopardy. Ironically, the only companies that have been censoring content are many of the same ones that want net neutrality.
So they seem to think that for some reason, ISPs can be trusted not to censor, but social media sites cannot.
Those rules were rescinded in 2018 when the FCC rolled back the Obama-era regulation under the principle that innovation would be much more likely to happen if the government got out of the way.
Which they believe doesn't apply to social media sites. Now there is an important difference between ISPs and social media websites, and that's that ISPs are funded by people who pay to subscribe to their services, while social media sites are largely supported by advertisers. This probably does make a difference with respect to how trigger-happy they are with the ban hammer, since if someone puts up a website that angers Coca-Cola or Disney, ISPs that connect to that website don't have to worry that much because they don't get most of their money from such companies. However, YouTube relies on advertising from companies like that. So when they tell YouTube to take something down or to restrict it, or they will pull their ads because they don't want their brand associated with it, that is an existential threat to YouTube.
All our freedoms, the very concept of freedom, springs from this right. Lose it, and we're no longer free, not as individuals and not as a nation. I'm not willing to accept that. PragerU doesn't accept that, and you shouldn't either. Okay, so how did we get into this situation? A little background. PragerU is what is called a 501c3, a nonprofit educational media company. It's known primarily for its 5-minute videos. In 2016, viewers began to notice that certain PragerU videos were no longer available. YouTube had placed them on its restricted list, which prevents the videos from playing on computers using content filters to screen out violence and pornography.
Which doesn't actually mean that they're altogether not available.
PragerU assumed this was simply a case of bad algorithms, but YouTube said no. Each restricted video had been reviewed by a walking, talking human. The list included such diverse titles as Are the Police Racist? By Heather McDonald, Israel's Legal Founding by Alan Dershowitz, and even a video on the 10 Commandments by Dennis Prager. YouTube deemed each one unsuitable for young people, treating these videos the same as they would, say, for ones containing pornography or excessive violence. Keep in mind, this is PragerU we're talking about, as Main Street as you can get. And that ultimately turns out to be the issue. PragerU's center-right content, Many of their videos, by the way, have no political theme at all, offends YouTube sensibilities. In other words, the videos aren't being restricted to protect young people from inappropriate content. They're being restricted to protect young people from ideas YouTube disagrees with.
No, they're being restricted to protect advertisers from things that those advertisers believe will hurt their brand. PragerU believes that since social media websites are public forums, not to be confused with publicly owned forums, rather than private publishers, they are legally obligated to not discriminate on the basis of expressed political views. If this is the case, why should it not also be the case with respect to ISPs? If being public forums places legal obligations on social media websites to not discriminate, why are ISPs not subject to those same obligations? ISPs are not private publishers, and they are what people need to use to access public forums.
A few years ago, the social media giants, Google, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, started to behave not like public forums, but like publishers. They stopped following Section 230, which specifically requires that these websites promote a true diversity of political discourse, and began to judge content by their own political and social criteria.
No, they started to judge the content by the criteria their advertisers told them to. Do you not remember what happened a few years ago? You see, there was this thing called the adpocalypse. Ads started popping up on videos that the big advertisers didn't like. So those advertisers pulled their ads and told YouTube to crack down or they wouldn't pay them for ad space anymore. Lots of us YouTubers lost lots of money for a while, but as YouTube cracked down, the ad revenue started to come back. It still isn't quite what it used to be, but it's better than it was during the worst days of the adpocalypse. If PragerU wins this lawsuit and somehow forces YouTube to no longer crack down on the stuff the advertisers don't like, those advertisers are going to leave and never come back. It would be a permanent adpocalypse. It could be so severe that YouTube could no longer make enough ad money to survive. It may have to restrict use to paid memberships. YouTube Red could end up being the only YouTube.
In other words, the social media giants want it both ways. They want the protections of a public forum and the editorial control of a publisher. We're fine if they're a publisher, and we're fine if they're a public forum. They just can't be both. If we win our legal action, YouTube will have to return to the way things were when they started.
I would love for YouTube to return to the way it was before the adpocalypse. But that's not up to YouTube. That's up to the advertisers who give YouTube its marching orders. This sucks, of course, but the only alternatives I see are YouTube becoming something you have to pay to use, which I don't think is better, or it becomes nationalized. I don't see how a website that operates worldwide could be nationalized. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.